收看今天文茜的世界周报欧洲版。在进入欧洲相关的议题之前，我们先来谈一下台海风险。台海风险最高峰被讨论的时间点是2022，接着到2023年，美国每一年的3月都有在参议院跟众议院的称之为叫情报委员会，这个情报委员会里头呢，就会举行情报听证会，从中情局局长、情报总监各个主要的人，通通都会坐在那里。2023年3月的时候，当时中情局局长或者是情报总监海恩斯都和2022年的说法完全改口。2022年的说法是2027年中国准备攻打台湾，甚至数个月到1年之内。2023年的3月的说法是，中国目前没有武力攻打台湾的打算，只有当和平方案不可行的时刻，中国才会考虑使用武力。这是海恩斯情报总监，而中情局局长 William Burns 则直接改口说，他认为10年之后台海才可能会有风险。他说这句话跟他上一次说几个月到1年之前的时间相差只有4个月，而现在美国总统大选到了，3月也到了，美国的参众议院再次的召开了情报听证会。情报听证会里头，台海议题又浮上台面，浮上台面之后，又来了2027年之前，中共就可能会攻打台湾的说法。美国的国家情报总监海恩斯的说法说，北京将继续利用军事力量恐吓其邻国。我们预计解放军将部署更先进的平台，部署新技术，并增强联合作战能力，特别是聚焦在台湾和西太平洋地区。当然，他们也提到最近金厦地区，中国把金门跟厦门这个地方变成内海化，那这就是一个警告。所以呢，台海问题再度又成了美国的一个重大的危险地区，跟2023年的3月隔1年又不一样了。美国的有线电视网因此就针对他们所说的2027年可能爆发战争，台海到底有多危险，制作了一个专题。我们不能不了解我们所居住的地方，在美国人的眼中，如何一会儿有危险，一会儿没有危险，现在就有了危险。我们来看一下 CNN 的专题报道。
A war over Taiwan would be an act of madness. Tens of thousands could die.
Nearly 1.2 million jobs have disappeared.
There could be a global Great Depression. Nuclear weapons would be on the table. An attack would be a massive gamble for China's Communist Party. It could risk losing the party's grip on power. But China appears to be preparing for its D-Day. Its leader Xi Jinping has said he seeks a peaceful reunion. But he wants his military ready to invade, if necessary, within 3 years, according to U.S. intelligence. Why would China risk everything and throw the world into turmoil over an island less than 1% of its size?
回想1972年毛泽东和尼克森季辛吉签订上海公报时，毛泽东曾经对台湾问题提出100年搁置的建议，避免美中一战，也换来了美国同意一个中国政策，并且附上反对台独、反对两国论、反对一中一台的密约承诺。
In a conversation with Henry Kissinger in the 1970s, China's leader Mao Zedong said he could live without Taiwan for now. But in 100 years, we will want it, he said. And what's more, we are going to fight for it.
在上海公报之后52年，全球局势巨变，台湾问题等不到下一个50年。 在讨论中共会不会打过来之前，华盛顿邮报专栏作家扎卡利亚说：“你必须先看清楚美中台长久以来错综复杂的关系。”
One of the war's most historic meetings.
America's relationship with Taiwan had been complicated. It had bankrolled Chiang Kai-shek in the Civil War, then turned its back on him after he lost, and planned to abandon him if Mao invaded. But in June of 1950,
we are fighting in Korea for our own national security and survival.
Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, and neighboring Taiwan became a crucial Cold War player.
时任美国总统杜鲁门甚至派遣美军舰队进入台湾海峡。
And America backed Taiwan as the only legitimate government of China.
怎奈好景不长，
But by the 1970s, times were changing. America was losing a war in Vietnam. And President Richard Nixon needed a new Cold War strategy.
The greatest threat to the United States was not China, it was the Soviet Union.
于是，在1971年，尼克森派时任美国总统国家安全事务助理基辛格密访北京。隔年，时任美国总统尼克森访问中国。这次历史性访问最终导致1979年美国与中华人民共和国建交，不再承认中华民国为中国合法政府。
Meanwhile, at the United Nations, Mao's China was invited in, while Chiang Kai-shek's Taiwan
This vote has confirmed the
was forced out.
1975年，蒋中正逝世，失去美国支持的台湾，在国际上孤立无援。
Chiang's son, Chiang Ching-kuo, took over and pursued a bold new strategy to move Taiwan toward democracy in order to save it.
He knew that the future of Taiwan would depend on support of the U.S. But how do you build up American support? You have to be really democratic.
1987年，蒋经国明令解严。1996年，台湾实现第一次总统民选，成为世界上第一个真正民主的华人国家。但是当时的台湾政府已经意识到，这张民主牌不能保护台湾多久。
China shook the world, detonating its first nuclear bomb in 1964. Meanwhile, a bloody war in Vietnam had America considering a retreat in Asia.
When Richard Nixon was elected, he gave a very prominent speech talking about having Asian allies and partners stand up for their own defense rather than relying on the United States. If you were sitting in Taiwan, that made you very, very nervous.
Taiwan desperately needed a way to keep its powerful ally on board. The solution? Link Taiwan's economy much more closely to America's, to give the U.S. more skin in the game. The microchip. Our lives run on semiconductors.
而张忠谋就是那位创造出护国法宝的人。
Its government asked him to lead not just one company, but to lead Taiwan's entire chip industry. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. Chiang's approach was a massive gamble.
At the time, it was a crazy idea because there were no companies that existed that only designed chips.
But Chiang was determined. In 1987, he founded the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC.
It would give birth to a series of other startups that wouldn't have to invest in factories, wouldn't have to invest in equipment, could only do the design and rely on him to manufacture.
And nobody makes them better than Taiwan. Over 60% of the world's chips come from this small island. And 90% of the most advanced chips are made by just one company, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
即使是中国，2020年有70%的晶片来自台积电。
Some believe TSMC isn't a target on Taiwan, but a silicon shield over it.
理性来看，中国攻台将导致晶片生产停摆，损害中国自身经济。
中国共产党
For Xi Jinping, that might be a risk worth taking.
For China, it's not just about chips. It's about unification. That is part of their basic ethos.
And finally, some of my own thoughts on this subject. China has never accepted that Taiwan can be an independent country. Every leader, beginning with Mao Zedong, has affirmed the goal of reunifying the two. But in the past, Communist China believed that it could wait because time was on its side. Eventually, the mainland, with its massive economy and billion-plus population, would draw the tiny island of 24 million into its orbit. That was the thinking. But that premise is proving untrue. Taiwan has developed into a feisty democracy with a political culture defined by its political system and in stark contrast to China. Over the past few decades, Taiwan has gotten more determined not to reunify with China. So, Xi Jinping must look at the situation and feel time is not on his side. Perhaps it would be better to act sooner than later. Most people in Taiwan simply want to maintain the status quo and keep things going as they are. What does all this mean? That this issue will need to be managed rather than solved, and managed very carefully, both by Beijing and Washington. This is the one place on earth where there should be little room for macho rhetoric and provocative actions. All three sides should keep talking to ensure no misperceptions or miscalculations. Deterring China from invasion is crucial, but persuading Taiwan to avoid needless provocation is also important. Washington should be careful not to needlessly provoke China as well. None of this is morally satisfying, but the stakes are high enough that one thing is clear. Were these tensions to be mismanaged, were this conflict to turn into war, it would be a lose-lose-lose for all three parties. Indeed, the whole world would suffer cataclysmic consequences. Better to kick the can down the road as long as possible and hope it doesn't explode.